Welcome to the Serrano Brothers podcast. We are twin brothers who are pastors in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We talk about faith, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, culture, and anything else we think is interesting. Thanks for joining. Friends, we are back and we are interviewing the bishop pre-nominees for the Sierra Pacific Synod bishop's election coming up in September. And today we have with us the Reverend Amy Kienzle. Welcome, Pastor Amy. We're glad you're here with us.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Can you tell us currently where you serve and what conference you're a part of?
Sure. So I serve at St. John's Lutheran Church in Midtown, downtown Sacramento, just down from the Capitol in California here. I've been here for 4 years, and I'm the associate pastor and director of outreach, which includes like direct service ministries, evangelism, and then I also took into my sort of portfolio adult formation as a way to kind of meet those sort of those ministry areas.
That's nice. Those seem like those two could go together very well with adult formation and outreach and evangelism and connecting, and it's having people become disciples, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, for me, that's what I realized. My predecessor, who it wasn't exactly like filling the same role, but I learned that she was outreach and discipleship. And I thought, oh, well, those kind of go together. So they had been separated or been like, it had been removed from the outreach area. But I thought, that's something I feel passionate about. I like to teach and I like to, do adult formation. So I thought, well, I'll take that into my area too, because I think it is foundational for doing that work. So
totally. Do you, when we, before we get into like kind of more of the ministry stuff, we kind of want to get to know you a little bit better.
Sure.
And so could you tell us like, what is one of your favorite childhood memories, whether it's inside or outside of the church? What is a memory for you that just stands out right away?
Sure. Well, I guess it would be outside the church for the most part, because growing up, we weren't super into church. So maybe we'll get into that story too. But I grew up on Long Island, and a big trip for us, like my family was very much like Long Island, but centered, but it's Metro New York, and a big trip was going into the city, which I know the city here is San Francisco, but the city there, and in my mind, is always Manhattan, or, and so I remember as a kid, my parents, I forget how old I was, but I was like, elementary school and like young, maybe 7 or 8 or something. And so they told us we were going somewhere, but it was a surprise, but we had to get on the Long Island Railroad. We took the train, which was always a big thing, and then the subway, which, people from Long Island never take the subway. But we were going to a Mets game. So, that was very exciting. And so baseball is I'm a big fan of baseball and the New York Mets. And so my family grew up rooting for them, and we each had our favorite players and, things like that. So I always enjoyed those times when we'd get to go together on these like trips into the city.
Are you still a Mets fan?
I am. And my new husband is a Yankees fan. So, it's like a divided household, but yeah, thankfully he's a nice Yankees fan. I'm not such a nice Mets fan. I'm kind of like, so it works.
A lot of people kind of see the public facing part of pastors and they don't really kind of get to know pastors on the other side. And so we're wondering, what do you do in your off time? Do you have like any hobbies, anything activities that you kind of keep coming back to?
Yeah. Sometimes I wish I made more time for them, the things that I really like to do, but art has always been part of what I like. I do art. I do painting and drawing and stuff. And so when I make time, I love to do that. But it's like it's all immersing for me. So it's kind of like, I have to like be in the right space and have like where I can lay stuff out and stuff. But I also I try and stay active, although now my knee is bothering me. So I was training for a half marathon, the Urban Cow, but my knee told me otherwise, so I have to like rest it and stuff. But and then I love cooking, so like even like other creative things, cooking meals for people. Although I can never do them simply. I have to, like, if I'm gonna cook, then it's also like I have to use all the pans and experiment and things.
Is your
So
kitchen like a huge mess afterwards, or like just?
it kind of is, and I don't like the dishes, but at least I have a partner who does. So I'm like, okay, good. I'll cook, you do the dishes, and it'll work.
It's only
But
fair.
and we have a dog, so I'll take the dog places. Of course, take him in the car means there's a ton of hair everywhere, so it's always
Right.
but I do like to get out in the outdoors too, like hiking or going exploring new places, or even urban exploring. Being from New York City or spending a lot of time in the New York City area, I always love to just like walk around neighborhoods. So I do that here too. I live in Oak Park in Sacramento, and there's a little downtown, so I just go to see what's going on and clear my head and stuff like that. So
That's cool. I like going to like towns too, like just exploring new areas.
Yeah.
And cities. It's really fun, and I really love downtown areas.
Yeah.
Little downtown areas, walking around those. That's cool.
Yeah, even when I travel, I don't like to schedule myself too much. It's like I just walk a neighborhood. I don't care.
That's nice. That's cool. Do you find yourself okay? Spirituality is very important, obviously, to all of us, right? So do you have any sort of spiritual practices or disciplines that you hold on to?
Yeah. For me, the way I hear God, or even, discernment, or when I'm trying to get like clarity on things, I mean, I talk to God, or I think I'm talking to God. Maybe I'm just talking to myself, but I'll be like, having these ongoing conversations. But for me, then I need to really be in community in some way, and so being able to I have a spiritual director that I have kept. I've been lucky to have the same person since seminary, which, I mean, we do virtual now, but my first call was in Michigan, and she actually moved to Michigan. So we were able to actually do face to face for the 6 years of my first call. And then we've continued that relationship. And so that's really important. And having people who can like hold my story, and then, be able to help me frame things like, where's God in that kind of thing.
For sure.
Poetry is sometimes a practice. I kind of go by feel. Like sometimes it is art of like the physical nature that helps me to like get in touch with spiritual stuff. I feel like poetry is very prayerful. So sometimes my prayers are more poetry, and kind of writing that down. Scripture is really important to me. And, it's one of those secrets of pastors. I think, we wish we made more time, or I certainly do, for like personal devotion as opposed to like preparing sermon, kind of like getting in the scripture. But I do feel that is a sort of a spiritual discipline practice for me too. I mean, it's given to us as our call and job, but it's also, I love the scriptures and just trying to see what God has as a message for me, but also for the people that I'll proclaim to, so I try to make that also more of a spiritual practice than just a task, right? So those are some
sometimes
of the
it can be, right? It can be a task sometimes, because it's like the
right.
job,
It's like, okay,
right?
right. So I
So
need a sermon, so we'll see what happens.
right. So to be able to actually intentionally use that as a discipline, and to both as for a way of listening for God and for communicating with the people, I think it's really beautiful. A beautiful practice to hold, that we all pastors would do that more. And I know that that's a trouble amongst all of us, so
yeah. And it's, we deal with the same pressures that everyone does. So it's like, sometimes it is, okay, well, got to get there on Sundays, so I better have something, but that even in that, then I try to reflect after, because always, even the ones that we think we're either phoning in or, well, I don't know about this one, those are the ones that actually someone will say, well, when you said that, it really touched me. And then you realize, okay, so it isn't me. Although,
right.
That's right.
Every time, Pastor Amy, every time I'm like, gosh, I just phoned that sermon in.
Right.
Somebody will come and say to me, that sermon was for me, Pastor.
Right.
And my wife is like, there's no way somebody said that to you, because my wife is like my most honest,
right.
Person in my life. And if she tells me like, it was a home run, then it was a home run. But if it was like, a bunt, then it was a bunt, right? And
Right.
she was like, it was a bunt. And I was like, listen, somebody just told me. I thought so too.
Right.
Right.
Someone else thought differently.
I don't know your story. You kind of mentioned that you weren't in the church and really weren't a part of it in your childhood. Did you grow up Lutheran?
Kinda. So, I was baptized at the church that was my dad's church. But he basically did the thing that a lot of young people do, right? Their parents pressured them to be there. And so they're there with the family until they're old enough to not want to be, right? And so he went through St. John's Lutheran Church in Lindenhurst, and we grew up in that town. And so there was a lot of like sentimentality or like family connection that my dad valued. And so so I always knew this unique story about my baptism, right? So my since it was gonna be at the same church as where my dad was baptized, my parents wanted to have it on the same day. So he was baptized August 1st. And lots of people don't even know their baptismal date, let alone their parents, right? So like October 1st was my dad's. And then they wanted me baptized on that day at the same church, but the pastor told them, well, we don't baptize generally outside the community. So we do them on Sundays. And which I know we've had those conversations with people. So mine is August 2nd of 1981. And so I've always had that like story as an identity story, but beyond that, it wasn't always clear what does baptism mean. It wasn't something we always had at our home. My sister and I, it's only the two of us, and she's a couple years younger. We did go to Sunday school there, but again, it was my parents kind of dropping us off and wanting us to have something. So, I appreciate that actually. My mom was actually Episcopalian growing up, and but I remember her saying like she believed God existed, or believed in God, but then didn't believe in organized religion. So it's kind of funny then that I went into serving organized religion, but so we went to Sunday school, but because it wasn't really like brought home that much, like we prayed before bed. My mom was the one that taught us to do that. So there were these little things where it's like, well, they're figuring out their own like home faith, but it isn't in the church. So we stopped going. Like, I think I was in either 4th or 5th grade. So I made first communion, but I didn't go through confirmation. And so it was really in college. And, when of course, as pastors, we've had to tell our call story a million times, right? And but I always think, well, my mom planted some seeds, or my family of origin did. And then when I was in college, all my friends went away, and I commuted from Long Island to New York University. And I was kind of bored. I didn't really have a community around me because I wasn't staying at the school. All my friends had gone. And so it was my mom that was like, oh, I don't know, look in the paper or go back to church. So she told like a young 20-something that they should go to church if they were bored. So I always think it's kind of funny, but it wasn't like an immediate like, oh yeah, okay, that's what I'm going to do. But I just think, okay, so these things were like filed away, or, and at NYU, I was doing medieval and Renaissance studies with an emphasis in art history because I really wanted to do medieval and Renaissance art. And of course, those are all the Bible stories. The church was the patron of the arts, right? And so I think that kind of like I remembered the stories from when I did go to church a little bit as a kid or Sunday school. So I don't know. I think it was just kind of like, of course, I would define it as the Holy Spirit now, or I would kind of like say, oh, well, must have been the Holy Spirit. But I think, those things were making me curious. So I went back on my own. Like I just kind of checked out the times at St. John's Lutheran Church where I was baptized, and showed up. And I was the only young adult, I think, really. But it did feel like something had been missing, like when I came back, and I couldn't really put a finger on it, but it felt right. And so then I started getting involved in a lot of things, and people were inviting me to stuff because I was the only young adult. And
that's
and then
cool.
you became a pastor.
Right.
And then just a hop, skip, and a jump.
Right. There's let's talk about you being a pastor. There's a lot of ups and downs with the ministry. And and I think it's really, well, Jeremy and I think it's really important to hold on to like our successes, because
Mhm.
sometimes the not successes
Yeah.
can be very depleting, so do you have any like successes in ministry? Like I, of course you have successes in ministry. Tell us some successes in ministry that you hold on to.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I said this in the Zoom, but it really was in my last call that the parable of the sower became very close to me. I was a mission developer, and it's not to just say, okay, well, that's good enough, but the fact that, God's picture of the kingdom has sort of a 25% solid return, sort of was somewhat
that's great.
reassuring, just to know that, like, we do what we can to, like, share it widely, but also we just have to be realistic about sometimes like what can be produced, or what comes up, and be thankful for it. So yeah, in Brooklyn, as a mission developer, so I was in a growing, or a hot neighborhood in Brooklyn, Greenpoint. Williamsburg is right next door, and Greenpoint's where like girls was set, and so over the 2000s, people were like wanting to go there, and from all over, and so my first call was coming to an end, or I felt like, okay, God's calling me to something else, and so they wanted me to go there and work with these two churches that had dwindled over the 20th century, as Germans moved out of the neighborhoods. New York changed a lot, and um, it became very evident very quickly that they were not really going to work together. So I focused at the one, and we created a new start called the Park Church Co-op. And the idea of the co-op was that even before I got there, that church had opened up a bit to like community members using it, especially like artists and musicians, and people that didn't have a lot of money to rent spaces. Um, and this was something that Ben Colahan, one of our colleagues, he was serving in the area right next to mine, and so we did some collaborations together. And one of them was, there was this tarot group that we were connected with one of the members, and he was actually my musician at the time. He's a young 20-something, sort of exploring different spiritualities, right? Like a plurality of spiritualities. And there was this group that like they weren't like worshiping with tarot or anything, but it was like they would explore the symbols of the tarot. And so they asked at one point, Ben and me, they said, well, could we do the spiritual leader card at the church? Like we're studying the spiritual leader card. And would you come and talk about being spiritual leaders? And we're like, sure. And we helped design it. We said, as long as you're not like worshiping anything else, like we could do this in church. But it was funny how they had created like for lack of a better word, like a liturgy, but it was really just like a movement of like, expressing intentions and talking about spiritual authorities in their life. And like, and Ben and I did a foot washing as they came in, and made the story of Jesus doing that like into a little like liturgical statement we could say in like just 20 seconds, as we're washing feet. And then at the end, so that, we went through their whole thing, and then at the end there was a debrief, like, and they do it I think every time, and people said, well, I almost didn't come because it was in a church. But then they said, but I'm really glad I did, because I've never heard anyone talk about Jesus the way that you and Ben do, right? So okay, so that was great. I mean, that was a really fulfilling experience. But then what really gets me is that the next year they wanted to do it again, and the other leader of the group was not a member of the church or part of the work in the church, but he asked me, could we do it again? And he said, and this time, could you do a sermon on spiritual leaders in the Bible? And I just thought, like, it just taught me that, if you are genuine with people and just say, hey, this is my faith, this is how I see it, but you're welcome here. At first, they can be a little like, okay, well, just don't talk to me about G, or, like pressing. But if you're genuine and true and consistent, like just stay, be there and be the same, like with them, people will actually move closer to you sometimes, right? Like it's like, okay, they're not trying to press something, but they've loved me, they've cared about me. And I saw that happen a number of times in Brooklyn. I mean, I had people doing evangelism for my church that were secular, like would not, they don't go to church, but when they heard, let's say, a friend say, I'm looking for spiritual guidance, they trusted us enough and they trusted me to say, well, there's a church over there you could check out. So like they were doing better evangelism than sometimes our Christian, people in the pews do. And I was like, okay, and so it was just being with them, letting them come as they are, as Jesus did, right? I mean, Jesus didn't, yes, there were a boundary or there were things he said, but so that's one that I think of, and it helps me think about outreach and what people think is outreach and really what works.
Right. I think that's a great segue, because you're talking a whole lot about spirituality. In your paperwork, you talked about our synod needing spiritual renewal. And when you said that in your paperwork, and when you said that and at that town hall that we did, my ears perked up, because I used to be an evangelical, and so that language still really appeals to me, and I believe it, and so can you talk about how does that take flesh from a bishop for the congregations, and how do we renew spiritually as a synod?
Yeah. I know the word spiritual is often like, it's hard to put a finger on.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, no, but it's hard to put a finger on, right? It's like, because I think it could sound woo-woo to people, but I think it's really all of what we do can be part of that spiritual renewal. But I think it is challenging from the bishop's office down, it is hard to make promises that the bishop's office will do that for people, right? Because other things get in the way. But I think as a synod, and as much as the bishop, in relation with other leaders, and really finding other, not only the staff, but also like whether it's deans or whether it's other lay leaders, even throughout the synod, to really foster opportunities to connect, right? Because I think, of course, we need relationship building and building back trust in our synod. And by the way, every synod needs that. New York was talking about it when I was there, and how do we, especially between like synod and congregations and clergy, and then, between congregations, how do we try to create some intentional opportunities for congregations to come together separately from conference meetings, and just to even enjoy each other's company, or to talk about the struggles of ministry, and so I think that the bishop's office could encourage and even arrange for or create some of these opportunities. I've thought about, I often have to challenge myself into these kind of like, okay, spiritual renewal is important, or like spiritual practices are important, because I think Lutherans, and I, even though I'm not, like I said, I'm not completely formed by the Lutheran culture early on, but I think Lutheranism can be very rational, or very like, okay, just like do work, and and so I really challenge myself. It's why I keep a spiritual director who actually is a little more charismatic than I am, because it challenges me to like, can I feel where God is in this, right? And so I think I commit to those practices, because I know that it's not my first thing, but I know it's important. And so like, one thing in the New York Synod that I saw, every time you visited the Synod office, there was worship at noon, and anyone who was there goes to the chapel. Like we do that together, and I think having the staff do that together, like, and commit to that, and finding ways for, through these virtual opportunities, whether it's Zoom or other things, to build a culture of text study or Bible study together, like offering prayer or offering text study from the bishop's office, but then also encouraging others to do it. I think that's part of spiritual renewal. I also think, the other part we talked about earlier, like discipleship, right? How do we encourage discipleship among our people and give opportunities for deeper exploration? One of the things that I have been thinking about over the last year or so is this idea that Jesus preached to crowds, followers, and disciples. And I think sometimes in the church we talk about discipleship as like, well, we're all disciples, right? But the reality is we have seekers who are in the crowd that are curious, right? And we may have people who are been in the church for 50 years who are also in the crowd still, right? They're like, I come here, but I'm not really sure, or I'm like still trying to figure it out. Then you have the people that come from the crowd and say, you know what, like I see something and I'm willing to say Jesus is the one I follow. And that's enough for me, right? Or that's like good. But then you have the people that are like, there's a spark and you see it. And a lot of times we don't have anywhere for them to then be discipled further. Or we don't really think like, okay, so what does it means to discipleship? And so I think a big dream of mine, which wouldn't happen in a first like year or two of being a bishop or something, but like a lay academy, like how are we, and maybe even clergy academy, maybe it's just like giving people more confidence in their own faith and how to live it in a changing world, right? How to be the church in this different landscape, right? And so some of it is really scriptural and spiritual, like the tools of the faith. And then some of it's really just practical, right? Like how can we find experts that will speak to clergy and lay people about virtual, like how to use technology better, even if you don't have the capacity, what are some tools that or tricks that you could use, or definitely commitments to the justice issues, right? But like, what does that mean for people, right? So I've seen lay academies in other synods, but they were more like sort of the mini seminary things, and that's good too. But even some more practical, like tangible, like even some of the like, what does it mean to have different models of the church for this changing time? So I mean, I think those, and then I think we just need to like, empower is not the right word because God already has empowered us to live the mission in the world. But we need to like set people free to do that and give permission, or like say, yeah, I think some of my success in Brooklyn, because there weren't a lot of structures around, was just to say yes to things. If people had an idea and it seemed reasonably okay, it's like, let's try it. And like, you can try it,
The way I talk about that is that it's my job to throw kerosene on people's fires.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah. When you see the spark, and I think also being like paying attention, I don't know if you can do this I think you can do it at the bishop's level, but definitely in congregations, like it doesn't have to be a blanket all come, like, let's try and find the people that have the gifts and invite them. That's better than just saying, well, anyone who's interested, come. I think we need to be more effective in the way that we do that. And I think that's where the bishop, for the leadership of the staff or the leadership of like other entrusted people, need to do that. Excuse me, I need to wave at my, there we go. Sorry, it was beeping at me and the lights were going to go out. So
oh, that's funny.
It's on a timer. It's like,
no, it's all right. You have to wave at your light every once in a while.
Yeah, it doesn't see me here. I don't.
That was great. That was a great. There is obviously, 3 expressions of the church. We talk about this. We all should know it. Although Jeremy didn't in one of our podcasts before we started.
I didn't grow up Lutheran.
Which 2 did you get? Which one?
I got congregation,
church-wide, right?
Okay, the church, right?
Right. So in the ELCA, it's church-wide, synod, and individual congregations are the 3 expressions of the church.
Thank you for not testing me on that.
No, I get that. but what do you think the function of the synod offices? You've already kind of named a couple of things that you have ideas for, but what else is the function of a synod office?
Yeah, I think it is in part the vision casting, and the public witness. I would like to see our synod do a little more of the public witness when the world is dealing with things or our society is dealing with things, like making sure that, there is a statement that helps guide, because I know that in our church, we look for that even as cover for what we can say. Is like, okay, so like if the larger church is saying it, if the synod is saying it, then like we can say it, because of course we have people in congregations that are not all on the same page, but like, then we can say, well, this is kind of what our church values. So like, And then I think, I mean, of course, there's a lot of the ideological stuff, but then there is the accountability, helping us have accountability to the relationship we have in the institution, not protecting institution exactly, but there are things that like, I think we are accountable to, and there are definitely spelled out things that, we know as pastors, we have to keep those, good records, or at least make sure we have a staff that will help us do that if we're not the best at it. And so the Synod does have that function, and to be the, and really be it is the go-between them, between the, those two other expressions, right, of the congregation and the church-wide. And so to do what we can with like better communication, and figuring out what that looks like, right? Like, how do we communicate? What is the larger church saying? What is important to us as a church? And what is the vision of the Synod? And communicating then the vision and the mission of the Synod. But also holding one another accountable to that. I think, as sometimes we don't like the word accountability because we think it's like oversight or like, punishing. But I mean, we are accountable to one another, like in this relationship that we're in as the body of Christ, right? And then we're in these like geographical divisions for our church, right? And I feel like sometimes we don't really ask, how are you doing as a clergy person, or how's your congregation doing? We only hear about it when it becomes a problem, right? And we don't also ask things like, so tell me what your best sharing of the good news was this year, or like, accountability to the gospel too. It's only like, money and sex and like, it's all the other things that we ask about, or or if there's a crisis there. But how many people are having crises of faith, right? And we don't necessarily ask, or we don't hear about it. And again, I realize it's, it's reciprocal relationship, and I know there's been breakdowns. So some people are like, I don't answer the bishop's call, or I don't, I'm not going to pick it up or something. But I think we have to keep trying as a Synod too, and the Synod Council, along with, being a partner in that. Like, how do we, sometimes, I think in a lot of ways it's the trust building first, so that it becomes more, we can do that accountability with good faith. But so that's some of the things I think of when I think about the Synod office, and what it can do.
How do you think trust building, how would you imagine like trust? Because I agree with the trust building part. Like, how do you imagine that would go for you? Like, how do you think you would start trust building with those maybe who are a little more, who would consider themselves like maybe disenfranchised from the Synod?
Sure. Yeah, I think, as I think about, if I were to be in this role, I would definitely try to reach out to those folks first, and just say, like, I want to just meet with you and listen. I've always tried in my ministry to say, like, to be open, just say, like, even if you disagree, or I'd rather hear the criticisms, or the like, or the anger, or whatever it is, outright, than, oh, at lunch I heard these people were talking, kind of thing. And so I take seriously that it is the responsibility of the bishop in a way to make those first like contacts, or to try, and to learn, sort of find out from other colleagues, or from, those who are more familiar. Like, probably the deans are a good place to start, to ask, like, okay, who are those people that you feel need to reach out, because they don't come to conference meetings, or they haven't come to Synod assemblies in a while, or they feel like, there's no point, because they're still here.
Right.
And so the question is, why? Is it just convenience? Is there a commitment to any of the mission? And how can we help bridge that a little more? But figuring out ways. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, some people feel burned by the Synod, right?
Right.
A pastor call maybe didn't go the way they wanted it to, or
yeah,
I mean, there's numerous reasons why individual congregations can feel burned, and
right.
and maybe like you're saying, with a new administration, there could possibly be some reconciliation of some sort. Like,
Yeah. And it's always, of course, perception is reality, and perception is not always the truth either, right? So, but we have to go with what people are saying they feel, right? Like, or try to hear even beneath some of the, like, sometimes they won't say it outright, right? And I don't know any other way except to go genuinely and humbly, right? And say, I am a different person. Or Synod is different now. We do want to hear, and also then just to be sort of repentant about it, like on behalf of, I feel like I've seen that be powerful for people too, whether or not they're even in the Lutheran church, to just apologize on behalf of the church.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it's just an acknowledgement that it wasn't you were right. Like, the church has done things, and, and so even a new administration can go and say, I'm sorry that the Synod let you down in this way, and we're trying to be different. If you're willing to, like, take some steps toward us, we'll take steps toward you too, and try and figure it out. But I mean, I guess there's no way. It sounds so basic, but it is the only way, in a way.
Absolutely. You've kind of talked about models of viewing, a ministry and discipleship and all that kind of stuff. And I think for the Synod as a whole, we need a strategic plan. I'm not asking what that plan is.
Thank God.
Right,
like, oh, no.
right. Because who knows that, right?
Here's my map. I
exactly.
Here.
But how would you go about creating a strategic plan?
Yeah. Well, it does begin first, I think, like, I haven't done this quite yet, although I'm, to even look at like a 6-year, let's say, right? You get the 6 years. So, I mean, I think the first 1 or 2 is the reaching out and building relationship, right? And figuring out and so providing some of that, so that, and that's not to say I don't have idea, I mean, I think we can cast some vision of different models and encourage people to work together too. But then I think it's, I have been part of other mission strategy processes, and was on the leadership team for that in Michigan. And I think as much as we can get, we did it in conferences. So we went and we actually involved people in conferences to do some total brainstorming about the church. We were led by consultants, but, like, if you had no structures for the church, what would God's vision for the church be? And to really get us thinking outside the box on, because I think we get so stuck in the models of Synod, of church, of whatever, that it's hard to even imagine a different way, right? We're just plugging in, like, okay, so we're missing this, so we plug it back in. And, so I think even bringing in some, like, with either professional leaders conference or other conference gatherings or other opportunities to bring in people that can help us to do that, to think outside the box, or think about different models that have worked in other places, or even just bring us together around, like, let's see what our purpose. I like the language I learned in the mission strategy process. It's like, we have a purpose in God's mission. God has a mission, was to send Jesus Christ to bless and to save the world. But we have a purpose. Each of us has a purpose in that, as individuals, as congregations, as Synod, right? Like, and so discerning that together is important. Not just the bishop or whoever going out and saying, well, this is our mission or our purpose or our vision. But how do we find ways to bring people together in that? And so I think that does take some of the trust building initially, so that they'll even come, right? But then providing opportunities to engage in this process together, and to be clear that we're trying to get to an end. Like, and it's not to say that there's questions about whether you can even vision in this time, right? Like, to say, well, this is our vision. Like, I think the purpose is a better discernment, and then have short-term visions of, like, okay, so where are we going in the short term? Because things are changing so quickly. And I think the minute we settle on one vision, it won't be effective for what's coming at us so I think in this transitional kind of liminal space that we're in as a church, like, what is church in this day and age is the question, right? I think in this liminal time, it's hard to set just like one vision and work only toward that. But I think we need to try out some things together and be in conversation about, like, so what would God want us to be for the sake of our the people living in the territory of our synod, right? Again, not just for our churches, but for the
Amen.
people and our neighborhoods, right?
That's really good. I think obviously as you're talking about how you would implement this, you're going to have staff around you. And so what do you think are the giftings of the staff that you would need to surround yourself with to like really complement your own style of leadership? So how would you imagine the staff being around you? What kind of giftings would they have?
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely collaborative. So I like to have a team that can kind of think through ideas together, right? Kind of like do some discerning together. And so I would need people with like who appreciate team as much as I do, or, appreciate that collaboration as much as I do. As I've thought about it, I know, there are so many congregations struggling. And so I wonder if there is someone who has gifts in whether it's accompaniment, or even chaplaincy, to understand like, okay, like if it is time, like how do we discern if it is time for certain ministries to give thanks for what has been and to do something new, or to like, I mean, sometimes close, but maybe there's like, but it's always saying goodbye to what was, so that we can, and to give thanks for it, not to just like, because there's a lot of grief. Anytime change brings grief no matter what, right? Like, if we're honest about it, right? Because it's, well, we're not going to do that anymore. Whether it's a whole closing of a congregation, or just like, well, we can't do that Sunday school program that way anymore. Or like, I mean, and so is there someone who would work with congregations in assessing those things, but in a compassion, like in a pastoral way, but also not a way that's just like listen and do nothing, but here are some ways that we can move forward and figure out like some new things, new possibilities. Definitely I want to find good administrative staff. I think, I know even in my role here in a relatively large congregation, I mean, it's not really large, right? When you think about other ones, but we have 3 pastors in multiple departments, right? So it's like, we need administrative support, right? It just, even if I was the best administrator ever, you need someone who's going to help keep those things, because you can't when you're trying to do the other stuff, right? And, of course, financial teams and others that can do like the operation stuff like that. I think finding a good operational director would be important, again, to free up the bishop and the other staff to do ministry things, right? And, I've been trying to think, and this is something that, of course, whoever is in the job would have to learn more, get a fuller sense, but, whether deploying staff would be a good thing, right? And since our synod is so large and diverse, that even thinking about what the office structure would be, right? Do we need one office, or is it more like outpost offices, and one that houses the stuff we need to have? There needs to be a location for certain things, but and so are there staff in different places that maybe have a rather than being like this is my expertise, but a more rounded out expertise, and being in other locations, right, where they can be the first contact for people, or people feel like, oh, there's a presence of the bishop's office here. And I know we can do some of that with deans, and I know they've been being built into that maybe a little bit. And so maybe that is another way to do that, is just to have people on the ground who are literally close to people, like, right, like proximity, so that, so maybe it's gifts, yes, but finding the best person in certain areas to be like trusted with representing the synod, and being able to like do some of that accompaniment with people and congregations.
Well, thank you for that. Unfortunately, as bishop, you're gonna have to handle conflict. It's kind of one of the parts of the job. And conflict, between churches, between pastors and staff, and pastors and it's just, there's conflict in the church because we're people, right? We're saints and sinners. What's your style of conflict resolution? How do you go about handling conflict?
Yeah. I mean, I don't love conflict, right? Like, I don't know.
Who does?
I mean, some people do. Some people do, like, actually, or
I run
and
towards
so,
conflict, so
yeah. See, some I know some people.
Yeah.
And so I don't seek it out. However, I do know that there are times when you just, you need to face it, of course, right? And my style is to really, again, like earlier I said, just tell me, to listen, right? Like to try and listen and hear, both sides, or whether it's a side or whether it's conflict with the, maybe I am the one side, but to listen, right? And I think to have others as part of that listening, right? Like, so to have, I've always in the past, if there was conflict, brought in someone else that I trusted, even just to listen, not necessarily to like join in the, like advocate my side or anything, but just to be able to hear, right? Because I think that protects you as well as like the other people, and allowing them to have their own advocate or, accompaniers in that. And then, to rely on counsel from other people, so I see myself forming my own separate sort of council with an S, right? Like of people that I trust, whether that's other bishops could be part of that, or other, or lay people, a mix of people, but like people that I would trust to kind of tell me honestly, like give me some honest assessments of what, my own sort of assessment of the situation, or like, so to check out those kinds of things so that we don't, in decision making about what needs to resolve the conflict, there'd be other voices that help to assess that as well. And again, I think it starts with also having a good staff that's like got emotional maturity, and also, even Synod council, right? Like really being intentional about who is on there and how we train folks in this, to support the bishop in this work, because it may not also be the bishop that needs to be the one to go in, right? Or even staff. Maybe it is someone from Synod council, or maybe it's a trusted layperson that has some expertise in the area around the conflict, right? And that could probably do a better job, but be trusted to keep the bishop in the loop, and so I think really it's an initial assessment of, okay, what's needed in this situation, and then trying to find the right people, and really determine who needs to, because sometimes it is the bishop that just needs to be the one to handle it. So not to like say I would always look to get out of the responsibility, right? But like, so
I'm not hearing that at all. What I'm hearing is to discern what is needed in the situation, and to recognize that maybe you're not the person to help deal with that. Maybe it is an outside consultant or Synod staff or somebody who's specially trained in that particular, that shows to me a real ability to go, maybe you're not the person, and that's okay. That's what leadership is. The leadership is recognizing what needs to be done and then making that thing happen, right? And so I really love that answer that you gave, because sometimes we might perceive that we're the person to do everything, right? But no, you're the leader to help instigate the process for people, right? To lead. And so thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, Jeremy, before we get to question 12 and 13, is there anything that we missed? No,
I don't think so.
Okay. What didn't we ask you that you think maybe we should have asked you? Like,
I don't know.
well, let me put it another way. What do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think we should know about you as it relates to being bishop? Like, is there anything like those? These are our last two questions. Like, those kind of go together. Like, what should we know?
Sure. Well, I guess one thing is my own picture or my own experience of bishops in the past. I think like, or what is a good bishop to me? Um, I have this unique, relatively unique, I guess. I don't know how unique it is, but I facetiously say that it may be me who, when I move around to synods, all of a sudden like bishops have issues or whatever. But I've been in the 3 synods I've been in, like I was counting it up. I think I've been through like at least 6 elections, like, or because
Wow.
in Michigan in my first call there were 3 in my time, because I mean, I think it goes to the challenge of the job too, and the stresses that can weigh on people and stuff. But people had to resign, or one bishop died in office, and so there were a lot of like kind of upsets to things. And but it gave me a lot of like experience with bishops and what kind of a bishop, what kinds of bishops were meaningful to me as a pastor. And for me, it was those bishops that actually were pastoral. And I know that sometimes the other stuff gets in the way of that, and that's unfortunate, right? And you want to be pastoral, but then there's all the other stuff. But it was the bishops that actually like listened when I took the time to go to them. And I've definitely had bishops where it was like in one ear and out the other, and you're like, oh, okay, like, or oh, you've got gifts, just like you can go do it. I've been told, but when I was asking for real, like, okay, like, I need some resources here. And so, I've had a couple of bishops, John Schreiber in Michigan before he died. I felt like, oh, this bishop is actually like my pastor. I trust him to tell him things, or if I'm struggling with things, Don McCoy, who became the interim in New York, listened in ways that the prior bishop didn't, and so I felt like that's what I appreciate in a bishop, also knowing the reality of things getting in the way of being able to do that all the time. But even just listening to people when they, like listening openly and making people feel heard, I think is important. It's been important to me.
Yeah.
So
I think that's good.
All right, I think that's kind of the main bulk of our conversation, and we're going to now enter into our kind of rapid questions.
Okay.
And we're doing this to anybody we ever interview. This is just kind of our thing. So, which food can you eat every day?
Oh boy. Probably some good New York bagels I could eat every day. I shouldn't, but I could.
What's your favorite movie genre?
I guess comedy. I can go with like, favorites are hard for me because I can like, it depends on my mood, but I like a good comedy. And but I also like a good drama. So it depends on.
Salty, sweet, or savory?
Salty.
In addition to the Bible, because every pastor says the Bible, which book would you want with you on a deserted island?
Oh boy. Probably something by Anne Lamott. I like her stuff. Something funny that I could like a funny memoir or something.
What fills your cup?
I think getting out in nature, just kind of, I love the city, but I need to get away, like to kind of recharge, just being out in the vastness of nature.
What depletes your cup?
I'm a little bit introverted, so sometimes if I've been like with people a lot, I just need to like go back and take some time on my own for self-reflection and stuff. So,
what's your favorite holy place?
Well, that's an interesting one. Well, it's very particular, and I don't get to visit it all the time, or, I've been there once, but a few years back, we went to Ireland, and the Wicklow Mountains, there's like a valley there. And I can still like go there in my mind, or like, and it was just so beautiful. And there were like ancient ruin, or like from the Middle Ages, like ruins of churches and things. And I don't know, it was just like, I felt God's presence in a way that was really peaceful. And like, so I haven't been back, but I plan to at some point, but I can live there in my mind.
Hmm. What's one piece of good advice that you've been given?
My mom, she'd always say, you make the best decisions you can in the moment with the information that you have, and so just like, you can't think about necessarily what might go wrong or whatever. And I try to follow it. I don't know. I don't always get there, but I think it's, okay, I'm just going to decide on what I know now and trust that God will be there. So,
what does rest look like for you?
Well, is it bad to say sitting on the couch watching TV sometimes, but
Not at all.
That's like,
All right. And lastly, what do you hope God will say to you when you enter the pearly gates?
Oh boy, we believe in pearly gates. I don't know.
Metaphorically.
Well, it's from the Bible, but well done, good and faithful servant, I think would be a good.
Pastor Amy, thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this podcast. It has been our pleasure.
Yeah, mine too. Thank you for the invitation.
Friends, this has been the Serrano Brothers podcast. Thanks for listening.